The world has entered its Second World War. Europe begins to fall into the hands of Nazi Germany while Eastern Asia falls into the Imperial Japanese. France, the United States, and Great Britain demands the fascist nations to halt their actions. However, the demands of peace are ignored and Hitler utilizes a new powerfully armed nation while Hirohito continually gains land in Asia. The Fall of France, May 10th through June 25th, 1940. Hitler grows sick of Sitzkrieg and decides to sweep through Western Europe and eventually reaching France. Hitler sends large forces of tanks through Ardennes. Despite the large and overwhelming German armies that the French couldn't handle, Hitler decides to combine his army with the troops stationed in Belgium. During the French's darkest hours, Great Britain arrives at the beaches of Dunkirk. From May 26 to June 4th, the boats carried over 338,000 battle-weary soldiers to safety and escaped from being bombed by the Luftwaffe. In June 14, Germany took control of Paris. Later, in June 22, 1940, they took control of northern part of France, and France was forced to surrender to Nazi Germany. After the fall of Paris, Charles de Gaulle decided to set up a French government in London and try to reconquer France. Due to the fall of France, Hitler shows the world how powerful Germany is in seizing lands at alarming rates. Hitler's blitzkrieg stands unopposed as the French army stood no match. The Battle of Britain, July 10th through October 31st, 1940. As France falls, Great Britain stands alone as the Nazis come through the skies, prepared to take over the homeland. Winston Churchill declares that his nation won't give in. Hitler plans to get Great Britain. In 1940, the Luftwaffe heavily bombs Great Britain. On September 7, 1940, the Nazis focused on targeting the cities. The Royal Air Force was outnumbered and outgunned. However, Great Britain had several advantages against the Luftwaffe. Electronic systems, aka the radar, tracked German forces, plus giving them a chance to ambush the Luftwaffe, while the Enigma helped crack the secret code which the Nazis used to communicate, helped further ambush the Luftwaffe or even evacuate citizens to bomb shelters. The battle rages on until May 10, 1941, when Hitler finally gives up hope on defeating Britain and withdraws. The Battle of Great Britain has put a stop to Hitler's attacks, finally ending his unopposed armies that marched west. With the radar and the Enigma, the Great Britain has fended off the Nazi attacks by intercepting them and ambushing them. Attack on Pearl Harbor, December 7, 1941. In October 1940, America cracked the code of the secret messages that Japan had been using. Knowing that Japan would attack South Asia, America sent aid to the Chinese resistance. In 1941, Roosevelt cut off oil shipments to Japan. Even though Japan was out without oil, their country still could operate. Despite their conquest of Asia, Japan fears that they'll lose their progress if the US were ever to enter the war on the side of the Allies. Admiral Isoro Yamamoto, the greatest naval strategist of the Imperial Japanese Navy, calls for attacks on the US fleet in Hawaii in order to eliminate the possibility of the US going against them. On December 1941, sailors in Pearl Harbor woke up to explosions. US leaders knew the attack would happen, but didn't know when. In just 2 hours, the United States fleet had been devastated. The Japanese viewed the attacks of Pearl Harbor as a success. However, not long after the attacks, news of it spread throughout the states. With an angered US population, President Roosevelt gave a speech in regards to the recent event and requests Congress to formally declare war on the Axis. Congress accepts without hesitation. The Battle of Stalingrad, August 23rd to February 2nd, 1943. The German Air Force bombed the city of Stalingrad during the night and decimates the city. Stalin orders his commanders to defend the city at all costs before Hitler even begins to attack. Hitler sends forces to seize Caucasus Mountains oil fields and seizes Stalingrad. Despite the loss at Stalingrad, it was taken back by the Soviets not long after by surrounding the city with over 1 million men, thus cutting the German forces within the city from incoming supplies. Most Germans died from the harsh Russian winter, leading to the surrender of the city's occupants. The Soviets regained the city Stalingrad. The Battle of Stalingrad was the turning point for the Soviet Union, as they began to gain ground from the Nazis due to increasing casualties for the Germans, mainly from the cold conditions they were ill-equipped for. The battle also prevented Germany being self-sufficient for the war, as most of their fuel supply was bombed by the Allies. Under the control of the Soviet Union is the Caucasus Mountains, which had oil fields that Germany wanted, and it was their only chance of having a legitimate fuel supply. Due to the Battle of Stalingrad, the Nazis lost their chances of sustaining a good oil supply. However, defending Stalingrad came at a high price. The Battle of Midway, June 4th, 1942. Not long after the attack of Pearl Harbor, the US sends B-25 bombers to Tokyo in retaliation. Despite the fact there was small amount of damages done, the Japanese population was shocked that the Americans were able to reach the Japanese mainland. This forced the Japanese to target the closest US base to the Japanese mainland, Midway Island. Located 1,500 miles west of Hawaii, it is the key location of an American airfield. Because of the Allies' codebreaker, Admiral Chester Nimitz, a commander-in-chief of the US Pacific Fleet, knew that a large Japanese force was coming. Admiral Yamamoto hoped that the attack Midway would draw the attention of the US Army. Also, the Army of Pearl Harbor would go back and defend this land. On June 4th, the US Army was hidden, and allowed the Japanese Army to approach the island. After luring them in, American planes swooped in, catching the Japanese by surprise. Therefore, 332 Japanese planes, all 4 aircraft carriers, and 1 support ship were destroyed. On June 7, 1942, Yamamoto ordered his crippled fleet to withdraw. D-Day, June 6, 1944. After the aftermath of the disastrous defeats in North Africa, the U.S. Army undergoes heavy changes and becomes a new and stronger army. These changes prepared them for an event called D-Day, which is codenamed Operation Overlord. This invasion of Normandy was the largest sea and land attack ever recorded in history. However, the invasion could not be launched unless 3 conditions were present. The airspace around the beaches was secured from the Luftwaffe. The Soviets had to launch an invasion at the same time so the Nazis' attention would be split. And lastly, the element of surprise. Hitler and his generals knew that an attack would occur, but it would take place on the shortest route from Britain to Europe. After numerous paratrooper dummies and the dropping of metal foil leading to make the Nazis think that they were being attacked by the air and accompanied by a naval fleet. On June 6, 1944, the British, US, French, and Canadian forces fought on a 60-mile trench of heavily guarded beaches in Normandy. The German forces had brutal defenses on the beaches, which causes heavy Allied casualties. After a brutal and desperate battle to turn the tides of the war, the Allies secured the beaches. The beach landings was an all-or-nothing plan for the Allies in order to enter Europe. If the landings failed, the Allies may have taken back Europe much later or even not at all. As D-Day happened, Hitler was asleep, so none of the generals dared to order reinforcements without his permission, which caused crucial hours to be lost. With Hitler's Atlantic Wall of weapons fallen, the fall of Nazis was not that far. The Battle of Leyte Gulf, the 23rd to the 26th of October. Allied forces land on Leyte, Philippines. Despite the Japanese already having forces stationed there, they devised a plan to halt the advances of the Allies. The Battle of Leyte Gulf splits into 4 different battles. Battle of Sibuyan Sea, Surigao Strait, and Cape Ingano. Their plan is to use the remaining ships to attack the US Navy, hoping to drive them off of Asia. One of the largest naval engagements in history occurs in Leyte Gulf. Despite their efforts, most of the Japanese ships sunk during the battle, making the Imperial Japanese Navy extremely weak. With the Imperial Japanese Navy crippled again, the Allies have no formidable opponents at sea. They can attack any part of the Japanese territory, including the mainland, with barely any resistance on that sea, making the Japanese lose land at a much faster rate than before. The Battle of Leyte Gulf also cuts Japan from its southern territories and its shipping lanes, further decreasing the amount of oil that Japan desperately needs. The Battle of Berlin, April 16 to the 2nd of May, 1945. In the last days of World War II for Europe, after years of bloodshed, the Allies have taken most of Nazi Germany's conquered lands. Most of Germany have fallen to the hands of the Allies, all but one, Berlin. 45,000 German troops are stationed inside the city, waiting for the seemingly unstoppable Allies to come. Due to years of fighting, most of German forces weren't actual soldiers. Police, boys from Hitler's youth, and militiamen known as Volkssturm. The remaining Germans were also dangerously low in supplies. Not far from Berlin is the Soviet armies waiting to take the city and finally ending the war. On April 20th, Soviet forces began to make their way into Berlin. At the same time, Hitler orders all remaining forces to reinforce the fence near the center of the city. The Soviets then make their way into the center of the city. Eventually, the forces reaches a building which was burned before the World War. The German resistance inside the building was a challenge to the Soviets due to the cramped space. Despite the heavy resistance, the Soviets defeated the remaining German forces inside and raised the Soviet flag on top of the building, becoming the symbol of Soviets' victory over World War II. On April 30th, only 10,000 soldiers remaining. There were soldiers from all directions. The Soviets then cut the forces into half, making the defensive a lot more difficult. While the Soviets advances towards the last German defense, Hitler hides in his bunker. On April 30th, 1945, 3:30 p.m., Hitler commits suicide. Not long after, the last German defenses surrenders. With the last major German defense fallen and the death of Hitler, Nazi Germany collapses and surrenders on May 8, 1945, thus becoming VE Day, the day when World War II ends for Europe. During VE Day, the whole world celebrated in many big and crazy ways. One of the most significant ones was Russia, which brings me to my bonus event. On May 9th, 1945, it was known as the day that Russia runs out of vodka. At 1:10 a.m., several Russians overhear reports of Germany finally surrendering to the Allies, and instead of waiting for the next morning to celebrate, everyone took to the streets, and yes, even if they're wearing pajamas, and celebrated. Less than 1 day later, the streets of Moscow were filled with a sea of vodka, and Russia faces a new crisis. The entire country has ran out of vodka. Oh, if you're wondering what happened to Japan, although it's fairly obviously won, I'll probably go over that in a different video. But other than that, I'll see you.
The sun shines out.